And I don't know if you've ever been paralyzed by the fear of making the wrong decision.
Oh, yeah.
But
every time I go to Cheesecake Factory, it's like there's way too many options on the menu here.
Oh, man.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Bible Geeks Weekly Podcast. This is episode 61. I'm Brian Sheely.
I'm Ryan Joy.
And thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in. We're going to go a little bit Haggai chapter 1 here and be considering our ways during this episode. We're in week 17 of the End of the Book Bible reading program, which is Mark chapters 13 through 16 and James chapter 1. So let's kick this thing off, I guess. Where do you find Jesus here in the last section of the Gospel of Mark? Maybe even in James chapter 1?
Yeah, I stayed in Mark chapter 14. And,
it's the easy place to be.
Man, I mean, there was a lot in Mark here at the end of the gospel to talk about. And I went to the prayer that Jesus offered in the garden.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we talk a lot about the model prayer in Matthew 6. That was the winner from last week's bracket challenge, was Matthew 6. But I think this offers a different model prayer, a different kind of formula. And I don't mean for us to become formulaic in our prayer, but for us to kind of think about the different parts of a prayer that's acceptable to God. And it really tunes our heart, I think, when we align ourselves with the way Jesus prayed. And so here he is in the garden, about to go through just the most awful moments of his life. And it says in verse 35 of Mark 14, going a little farther, he fell on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And then in the next verse, it gives us his actual words. And I see four different parts to this prayer. So he says, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will. And so the first part of the prayer is this address to God. And that's how we start our prayers usually, different ways that we might say, Heavenly Father. He says, Abba, Father. And
such a good word.
Yeah. So we've talked before about how Romans 8 and Galatians talks about how through the Spirit we can use this intimate address. We can model Jesus' closeness with God the Father and say, Abba, Father, ourselves. So I think in that, as far as finding Jesus, you do see his closeness, his intimacy with God.
Sure. And
I think that's a good place for us to start, is to think about who God is and to draw close to him, draw near, as we say. And then the second thing he does, it seems to me like a statement of faith. He's been saying things like this to people around him as he teaches them or instructs them not to doubt his miracles. But he says this now as an affirmation to God. He says, all things are possible for you. And I think that's a really great thing for us to say to God. For us,
absolutely.
Just as we're getting started in our prayers, we're sort of reminding ourselves, God, of course, knows that all things are possible for him, but in that statement of worship and praise that he can do anything, a statement of his omnipotence, it sets the tone for our prayers and for our faith in that prayer. And then he makes the request. So the third thing, there's only one part of this that's actually his request, and his request is, remove this cup from me. And the verse before, as we just read, said he was asking for the hour to pass from him, for this time of trial to pass from him. And then he closes by placing the request, this thing that he's asking for, into God's hands. This is what I'm asking, but now I'm just going to hand the request and even my desire for the request into your hands. He says, yet not what I will, but what you will. So, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will. So what do you think of that idea of using that as like a starting point for a prayer? Not the only starting point, but a way to think about prayer, addressing God and stating our faith in God, making our requests, and then leaving the request to God's will.
I think it has a lot to do with where we get to in James chapter 1, verse 6, when he's talking about prayer and asking God in faith with no doubting. yes, we acknowledge God, we address him, and then we acknowledge that he is capable of doing everything. You know, everything that God wants to do, he is capable of doing that. All things are possible. Asking for what we want, but then leaving that option in God's hands. And the way Jesus does that here is just, I think, a perfect model for us in the way that we pray. And especially in these times that we're in right now. I mean, we're probably asking God to do some very specific things in relieving our pain. But not as I will, as you will.
As you're describing that, it makes me think back to two different ways that two different people approached Jesus with their requests earlier in the book. In chapter 1, there was that leper that we talked about at one point that came up to Jesus, and he didn't even really make a request. He just said, "If you will, you can heal me."
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, all things are possible for you. I know you have the ability. It's just about your will. If you will, you can. The other guy that I was thinking about is a little later, that father in chapter 9, I think, who says, "If you can, do something for us and have mercy on us." And Jesus says, "If you can? What are you talking about? If I can? All things are possible for God." And so we can't have that attitude of if you can. We know all things are possible, but then we go a step further and say, if you will, you can, but if you don't will, that's not what I want. I want your will also.
I think it's a great example. Another time that Jesus speaks to God is in a few chapters later, or in the next chapter, I suppose, in Mark chapter 15, and that is my place where I found Jesus this week, in the crucifixion scene as he's hanging on the cross. This terrible incident that he's going through. And it says in verse 34, "And in the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, 'Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani,' which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And this is hard.
Yeah.
It's hard to hear Jesus' conversation with his Father. And in these words that are so deeply connected with his deepest desire and his deepest pain. And the question that he has for God is, why have you forsaken me? And there's a lot of meaning here. I think there's a lot of connection back. If you go to Psalm 22, Jesus is using the words of the psalmist there in his last hours there on the cross. And I don't know, you may get the sense that Jesus is unhappy with God. Why have you forsaken me? Maybe that he's in this just unknowing despair. But I think when you look at Psalm 22 and you read through that, it's a great psalm that we talk about a lot. But as despondent as the psalmist is in that psalm, obviously I think it's a messianic prophecy more than a psalm. But as despondent as the psalmist is, there's hope there, and there's an acknowledgement that the Lord is the great deliverer. If you look at Psalm 22 verse 24. It says, "For he has not despised or abhorred the affliction of the afflicted, and he has not hidden his face from him, but has heard when he cried to him." The psalmist is acknowledging there that the Lord is the great deliverer. He's the one who hears those who are afflicted. And so I think there's a lot of depth here in this question that Jesus asks on the cross. Why have you forsaken me?
Yeah, and a few verses later, after those words, when we get to chapter 16, we see that he has not hidden his face from him, but has heard when he cried to him. You see that break of light into the despair as God vindicates Jesus. And I think you stated that really well. This isn't a crisis of the unity of the Trinity in a sense that, the whole thing is broken down. Oh, this isn't Jesus actually believing that God has betrayed him. I mean, we all kind of go through this story of things falling apart and having difficulties, crying to the Lord, and he shows himself to be the deliverer of those who call on him, and he leads us through it. But this was the great moment of God's taking all of our pain and our suffering on himself, our wounds that belong to us. And I think that it is an incomplete picture if we don't see that ending of the psalm. We always say, read to the end of the psalm. Don't get stuck at the beginning.
Absolutely.
There it is again.
And I think this is, again, just another really good reminder for us, especially in the time that we're in right now. Not even remotely as terrible as what Jesus was going through. I'm not trying to make that connection. But, I mean, we may be wondering the same thing. When, oh Lord, are you going to take care of this crisis that we're going through? And just don't forget that he's not far off. He's not so distant that he can't hear us. He is the one who is hearing the afflicted. He's not hiding his face from us. He's listening to us, and he's the one who's going to deliver us.
There's great power in those psalms, all the laments, all the how longs, as long as we get to the place of submission to God's will and worship of him as God and us as his creature. I think us pouring our hearts out to him and really being honest in if it's despair we're feeling, if it's anger, whatever it is, being honest and working through that in his presence is a powerful thing. And Jesus models that.
Okay, so let's get into our second segment, and that is Scripture du jour.
What is the soup du jour?
It's the soup of the day.
That sounds good. I'll have that.
So we're in James chapter 1 tomorrow. This episode drops on Thursday. Technically, we're in Mark 16. We're going to get into James 1 because James 1 is packed. And there's a lot of really good stuff in there that we don't want to miss. And so we're going to highlight some of our favorite things that we found in James chapter 1. So what did you find here in this Friday of reading that we will be doing tomorrow? I don't know. I'm trying to keep all this straight. It's hard.
Yeah. Well, I picked the verse beginning in verse 5. I picked really the passage that you already talked about, the double-minded man, the doubting man, but it begins with this prayer for wisdom. So it starts out, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. And we might remember we've just read in verses 2 through 4, when we get to that point, about having joy in trial, and that's the kind of thing that we might need some help, some divine blessing to help us get to that perspective that we want to have to find joy in all of our trials. Sure. But that's the kind of thing we might ask if we're lacking that wisdom, to ask God. And wisdom is such an important theme in all the Bible, but in James it really shows up as this. There's this heavenly wisdom, as he talks about it in chapter 3, that is a different way of being in the world, a different way of making decisions. And so he says, but let him ask in faith with no doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He's a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. So I remember this time whenever I was 19, and I had this big decision before me. I was going through some preacher training classes in Kentucky, and I wasn't sure what I should do. I had this sense that maybe I wasn't quite ready for the work that I was doing, and I kind of wanted to go one way, I kind of wanted to go another way, I wasn't sure what to do. And I don't know if you've ever been paralyzed by the fear of making the wrong decision.
Oh yeah. But every time I go to Cheesecake Factory, it's like there's way too many options on the menu here. Oh
man, yeah.
I'm going to make the wrong decision. Sorry, go ahead. Please continue.
I love it. Yeah, so when you come to those Cheesecake Factory dilemmas, how do you find the wisdom to decide what you want? And this verse showed up. I don't know if I was reading at the time and found it, or if it came to mind, and I just started poring over it and thinking about it. And it gives you these two different instructions. One is to ask for wisdom, but the second thing is believe that God's going to give it to you. And with God, all things are possible. It's that affirmation of faith.
We keep coming back to it.
Yeah. Believe God's going to give it to you. And so I decided that's what I had to do. I wasn't going to necessarily see a sign or the answer written in the stars. I wasn't necessarily going to have this overwhelming, obvious choice. I just prayed, and then I did all the things you do. I made my pros and cons list, and I did those kinds of things. And I just decided to trust that God had given me the decision or that God had given me the wisdom to help me make the decision. And that gave me peace, and that gave me clarity, and that gave me, I think, the focus to have his will first and foremost in my mind as I tried to figure out what the right decision is. And so ever since then, anytime I face a big decision, like, should I propose to this girl? Should I, should I change my career paths and leave this career I was in? Anytime I make a big decision, I think of this passage, and it really helps me.
And the thought that God is generous toward those, who ask him in this way, I think that's another thing to really find a lot of peace in.
Yeah.
He's not closed-fisted, just piecemealing out blessings to us in small amounts. I mean, he's generous. That's another thought, I think, that really just connects you with God in a deeper way, that he really wants to give you everything that is good and right, and your requests to him should acknowledge the fact that he wants to do that. I think that changes the perspective, that you can not have any fear that God is going to withhold a good thing from you, knowing how generous he really is.
Yeah, it's this thing that we keep talking about. There's ability and willingness, and we have to believe, really believe that God can do these things and that he wants to do them. And I think for some reason, I don't know if I've made this up, but it seems to me that sometimes people are uncomfortable with the idea of God answering a prayer like this, a prayer not just for healing, but a prayer for wisdom, for God to give us an inner change that would help us, that he would bless us with wisdom as an answer to our prayers. In fact, I know I'm not making it up, because I've spoken to brothers that really believe that is only reading the Bible. That's the only way you get wisdom from God. Sure. And that's absolutely true. If you're neglecting the Bible, you're probably not going to find a lot of wisdom. But if you're seeking wisdom and you're asking God for it, this promises that he will give it to you. And there's any number of ways that could happen, and ways that we probably can't even imagine. Maybe you'll hear it from someone. Maybe you'll go through a trial and he'll teach you through his discipline. Maybe you'll gain insight through God just working in you. I don't know how it works, but he promised that he will do it.
He did it with Solomon, and so there's no reason to think that he won't do it for us as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I'm near the end of James chapter 1, and I found something really interesting, and I love this section of verses here, because it almost is a way of boiling things down, simplifying things down, which I love it whenever we can simplify some complex theological ideas into just a real nice soundbite.
Oh,
something to think about.
That's James' specialty.
He's good at it.
Yeah.
Definitely. So verse 26 of James chapter 1, if anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, this person's religion is worthless. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. Interesting here that he talks about religion, because this word is not really used a ton in the New Testament. You'd think it was all over the place, because that's really what we're about, is religion. But it's not really a word that's used very often. And if you really want to boil down what religion is all about, he talks about three things that are very important to that religious attitude, religious service that we have. And that's our tongue. It's the way we treat people who are in need, like orphans and widows, and our own personal purity. And if I had to think about all the things that James could have talked about regarding religion, what is the most important part of religion? I might have gone to a lot of things that look like outward acts of our worship. I would have thought about, attending with the congregation, assembling on the first day of the week, and how we sing and how we give, and all the things that we do in a worship service. Like, maybe I would have thought about all those things, but he boils it down to something far simpler and far more practical, I think, to our everyday life, which is the way we talk, who we help, and how dirty we are in regard to the world. Just a real helpful reminder, stripping away some of the things that we typically associate with religion and clarifying it for us to something we can do every day.
Yeah, he doesn't let you play act or pretend to be religious. I mean, he strips it all away, all the pretense, anything except really living as a follower. And these are all things, it seems to me, that wherever you are in your spiritual maturity, you can find more ground to take. I think that's part of why it's so challenging, is because you look at this list of, visiting orphans and widows in their affliction. Man, I can do more of that. I need to do more of that. I don't want my religion to be pure and undefiled. Keeping myself unstained from the world. And maybe I can do a better job of that. And you think about your tongue. I mean, and
he's going to talk more about that.
Yeah. There's so much work. There's always some little habit or little thing that can slip out, a complaint, an argument, whatever. What can I do to do better with my tongue? These are all really challenging, as this whole book is. It is piercing word after piercing word. I like the phrase you used to describe James' statements of they're like sound bites. And I feel like they're all these, like, what is the main statement if you clipped it out of a sermon? It's like he's clipped out the heart of a bunch of different sermons that he's given and place them together into this organized, though sometimes seemingly chaotic structure as he kind of jumps around from idea to idea.
All right, so let's get into our last and final segment. We're going to talk about a few of our favorite things.
These are a few of my favorite things.
And it might be a little strange to think about a few of our favorite things while we're going through such a challenging time. But what is it that you have found of great value, even in this quarantine that we're currently in?
Well, I have noticed that while I have not been able to see our congregation on a weekly basis as we would normally want to see them, and I hate that and I miss them, it's interesting. We've had more daily basis interactions since the quarantine.
Love that.
Yeah,
so good.
Yeah, it's so these different social interactions, though they're on Zoom or on Facebook or a call or a text or whatever, or people dropping by but standing 4 feet back on our porch. We've had quite a few long conversations while somebody's standing on our porch and we're standing 2 feet back into our door, just trying to be courteous to each other. But it's been really neat how everybody's reached out to each other. I do this daily devotional at 2:00 in our congregation's Facebook group, and people jump on, they let each other know they're there, put prayer requests out there, and I spend more time praying by name in those sessions and other times than I normally would. I think going through and talking about people, praying about people, and really trying to think about each other, especially in the congregation here, but also people all over the place. Everybody has connections at this point to people who are dealing with the virus, people who are serving, going into different areas, to all kinds of things to pray about, of course. So there's been a lot of that. A lot of people are putting themselves out there, especially on social media, there's so many lessons, people that I don't normally get to have a study with or to listen to them teach, or people singing songs, putting, all kinds of stuff out there. And I heard, I don't know where I heard this. Somebody was talking about how sailors get so thirsty that they start drinking salt water, and how we can start to do that with social media because we're not getting the interaction. So we start trying to fill it up with social media, and it can be, Adrian and I have noticed, a little bit compulsive. So we found that we have to have to hide our phones for long periods of the day. We both deleted the Facebook app again off of our phones, and we try to limit it and make sure we don't have too much with the social media and kind of settle in and focus on what's happening here. But in those small intentional doses, it has been really special kind of connecting with everybody every day.
Yeah, I have long thought that we put too much of a priority or too much of an emphasis on Sunday and Wednesday.
Yes, definitely.
You know, I mean, and not at all to take away from the value of those times that we have together, but
no.
That's not at all the extent of, you know, our interactions with each other. You go back to Acts 2, what were they doing? They were in each other's houses every day. You know, that it wasn't just a one time a week, a few times a week kind of thing. And I think the reminder of getting us back into that kind of interaction with each other, even while we can't be in each other's homes, we can, in a way, with technology and all these kinds of interactions we've been able to have. So I think it's a good thing to kind of revisit and think about our ways of being with each other differently.
Well, that's the other side of it. I think we're all going to be that much more excited and appreciative of the times we do get together, and way more hospitable after this, and just like our assemblies will be, you know, be treasured that much more. But this has been, there's been some real blessings. I think it's forced us all to rethink things.
Yeah, and I've found a lot of value. One of my favorite things is something you touched on, and we touched on a couple episodes ago too, of just the number of online resources that are out there.
Yeah.
Now, there are more and more people taking to the internet who may not have before. I think you said a couple episodes back that all of our favorite gospel preachers are now televangelists.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, is kind of true in a way. People are putting themselves out there online, so you have a lot more opportunities to hear from people who you might not have heard from before. One thing our family has found a lot of value in over the last few weeks has been, Wilson Adams.
Yeah.
He came to Monte Vista and did a gospel meeting there. I'm sure everybody knows Wilson Adams.
He might not know me, but we've met, and I know who he is.
That's true. So I don't know if you've seen this, but every Wednesday evening he's been doing a live stream. His wife has been putting the live streams out there, so it might be a little hard to find them. We'll throw links in the show notes. You can also go to their website, Veterans Parkway Church of Christ website in Murfreesboro, where they're putting some of the audio up. But every Wednesday night, he's been focusing on some real foundational, connected kinds of studies for families. And we've been listening to those, watching those as a family over the last few weeks. And Wednesdays, we're basically just all huddled around the phone screen or putting it on the TV, watching Wilson do his thing.
That's great.
And the things he's been talking about have been really helpful. I think he started talking about the amazing story of the Bible, and then he talked about dealing with grief. He talked about young people in the Bible who made a difference. And then I think the last one he did was on the walls of Jericho and how God was able to do some impossible things with the people there. And just really good studies. I've really enjoyed those. I don't know if you had a chance to catch any of those?
No, I haven't, but we'll check them out. Yeah.
Yeah, they're really good, and our daughter is really digging them, so that's always a plus.
Yeah, that's really cool. Well, going with what you talked about with just huddling around a screen and having a study, a devotional time or something with the family, I think that's been a real blessing. That's another favorite thing, I think, from this time. It's just that family time. Sometimes constraints are a blessing, you know?
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
And sometimes just being forced to slow down, forced to be stuck together. I think our family will look back on this time as an important transitional period for each of our kids in different ways. They're all in different stages, and there's been some periods of real discipline, but it's all been positive and good, and just really, like, ultimately the attitudes that they're developing, the connection that our family is I think strengthening with one another. And I think as much of a madhouse as this house can be, with 4 little ones running around and Adrian and I trying to keep a handle on it, it has been really enriching. And I've talked to other people And Adrian and I both have just noticed that couples that maybe have not always had been on the same page seem to be spending more time together as we talk to them. Families just all over the place seem to be, though we know, I don't want to paint like a glowing picture. Like, it's really hard on everybody and much harder on some of us than our family, which, we have, I still have a job and we have one another. We're not alone. But I think that there's some real blessings in, especially just being forced to stop kind of the mad race to lessons or to get somebody to school or to run to whatever the next thing is, and just kind of being stuck together. It changes as the clock has less alarms going off and less things on the schedule. It forces you, I think, to have a different set of priorities.
Yeah, I think our family is in the same boat, and we've been spending a whole lot more time together, making more opportunities to be together. It's kind of interesting because for a while we had a regular Monday date night with my wife and I, and every Tuesday my daughter and I would go out for a dessert in the evenings, and we were doing that real strong up until this whole thing, so we've had to put all that on hold. But even putting those things aside, like, we can't do those things, but man, we've been spending a ton of time with each other, making our opportunities to go take a walk in the evenings, just really being around each other a lot more. And it's been great. I've enjoyed it. And kind of like you said, though, I mean, not everybody is going to be in that position. I mean, maybe you're in a spot where you're by yourself and this might be a challenging time for you. I really do believe that there are opportunities even now that if you can't be around other people, there's still ways that this could be a positive time for you. But seriously, I think if you do have a family, this is a great opportunity to just, not even think about the clock, not even think about the calendar, and just focus more on each other. Yeah, I don't even know what day it is half the time, so I guess that's a good thing.
Yeah.
So.
It's a weird blur, man. The last 2 months, it's like a fog, but they're it's really strange. But it definitely, if I was going to be stuck with someone in a house, I'll take these 5 people, I suppose.
Yeah, so my last one is kind of going to Haggai 1, and I think seems like a really weird place to go, but with the Lord's people who they were so busy and so distracted, and they had, all of their plans and all their things going on. And you could see the Lord constantly, trying to shake them, trying to get their attention, kind of bring them back. And finally, he had to tell them through Haggai, look, I poked holes in your bag, and you were putting your money in a bag with holes, and come back to me. And really the thought there in Haggai 1 that I want to focus on is consider your ways. I think this is a great time for us to consider our ways. I think we're having to rethink a lot of stuff right now.
Yeah.
Almost every aspect of our life has been touched by this whole quarantine and social distancing and everything that we've been doing. And it's just a great time for us to rethink what we've thought of as normal up until now. When you're just in the rat race, when you're just going and constantly being pushed by the clock, being pushed by the calendar, being pushed by all of the expectations that you have. Now that all that stuff is on hold, I'm finding myself, and I don't know about you, but really just questioning, like, how important was all that stuff I was doing before? Was that really the focus of my life? Was that really what my life was all about? It's just a good time, I think, for us to consider our ways. Like, what really is a life well lived as a disciple? What is it about? What does it look like? And does it look a lot more like that now than maybe it used to because of all this stuff we're going through? I don't know.
Yeah, this can be an opportunity for pruning, really.
That's a good word.
Yeah. Like Jesus talks about the vine in John 15, and we all need to cut off those limbs that are getting nutrients but aren't really where it's at, and so that we can really thrive and grow fruit where it matters. And I think this is so good. It might have to be like, I might just change my whole sermon and make it consider your ways. But that is really good. It's a good way of stating something Adrian and I keep praying about and thinking about, and hoping that everybody is, as we pray a lot and think about our congregation, especially, I think this is a good way to state that. The problem that the people of Israel found themselves in and what God expected them to do with that was just stop and think about, hey, how's everything that you're doing working out for you? Is this really what you want to be doing? Is this the way of life that you should keep going through? Or should you pause and do a reset? And it's a great time for a reset.
Well, and I love that idea of pruning too, just from the perspective of what happens on the other end of all of this stuff. Mm-hmm. Because we've stripped away a lot of the niceties of life kind of to the core. When this is all over, are we going to try to put all those things back in place? Are we going to get distracted again with all those things? Or are we going to let them go and leave them by the wayside? I think at the end of all of this, we're going to find, hopefully, that we can come out of this stronger and with better habits and with less entanglements and really just simplifying. I think it's a great opportunity for us to simplify. And when you prune, you get rid of the dead weight, but you don't put it back later. You just leave it off. It's gone. And maybe there's some things that just forever now need to be gone.
Well, that sounds like a good segue to our challenge. You want me to do that?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so here's the challenge for this week. Identify some aspect of life that you thought was important, but now doesn't seem to be. If we can identify maybe a few of those branches that have, not by our own choice, been cut off, but we're doing just fine without them, and maybe we'd be better off leaving them off, as you said, Brian, instead of trying to reconnect them afterwards. I think this is a good time to consider our ways and note those things that are important. What are we missing that we can't wait to get back to that will be good to come back to? And what do we really not need to place a priority on at the same level that we were before? And maybe this has helped us to see that.
It's a good challenge. And whether you like it or not, you're probably thinking about some of these things already. So it's a good time, hopefully, to revisit some of these things.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning into the Bible Geeks podcast. You can find us on our website at BibleGeeks.fm. You can find show notes for this episode at BibleGeeks.fm/61. You can also follow along with our Into the Book Bible reading plan. That's at BibleGeeks.fm/Into the Book. If you got anything that you want to hear from us in the upcoming episodes, get in touch with us. Give us a shout out on social media. We'd be happy. We'd love, in fact, to entertain the topics that you want to hear about. And until next week, everyone, may the Lord bless you and keep you.
Shalom.